Hey guys, tonight we wake up somewhere uncomfortable. It's still dark outside, and there's a sour, damp smell coming from the corner of your one-room hut. You're lying on a lump of old straw stuffed in a sack that used to be part of someone else's clothes, and honestly, it shows. Your skin itches from the fleas, and you can hear a chicken pecking the floorboards under your bed because, fun fact, your livestock sleeps inside too. Warmth is a luxury, and firewood is expensive, so everyone's huddled under thin wool blankets that trap more smell than heat. Your breath fogs in the air. The outside world, if you dare go into it, is cold mud and suspicious puddles. But you'll have to face it eventually. You probably won't survive this. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, tell me where you're listening from and what time it is. I love seeing where you all drift off. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You pull yourself up, trying not to bang your head on the rough wooden beam overhead. You're already wearing the shirt you slept in. It's also your work shirt and your dinner shirt, and possibly your burial shirt, depending on how this day goes. Outside, the first light of dawn is filtered through a thin fog. It smells like wood smoke, wet soil, and something suspiciously like pig manure. Because it is pig manure. Your neighbor has 3 pigs and very little concern for where they relieve themselves. You trudge to the door. No hinges here, just a loose board wedged into place, and the moment you open it, a blast of morning chill hits you like a slap from an underpaid tavern wench. Not that you've seen a tavern in months. Those cost coin, and coin is reserved for taxes, rent, and occasionally bribing the reeve to forget about your goat's accidental trespassing incident. You're in a medieval village, maybe 12th or 13th century, give or take. Exact years are fuzzy because, let's face it, no one's keeping great records outside of monks, and they're more focused on illuminated manuscripts than accurate census data. But historians generally agree this period was challenging, which is academic speak for utterly miserable. Your feet are already soaked because your shoes are leather sacks tied with rope, and your path to the communal fields is a series of irregularly spaced puddles pretending to be a road. Oh, and you're not walking on stone. Roads are mud, and cobblestones are only for townspeople or nobles. You, my friend, are a peasant, and that means you live in the squelchy part of society. A bell clangs in the distance. The monastery's calling morning prayers. You hear it every day, but you've never been inside. Not worth the risk of tracking mud into sacred space. Plus, the last time someone from your village tried to sneak into the nave without permission, they got fined and publicly scolded. And in medieval terms, that's a punishment with lasting shame, like being subtweeted by the entire town in Gregorian chant. The air is filled with sounds you're not used to. No cars, obviously, but chickens, distant sheep bleating, the wind creaking the wooden fences, and the low drone of someone coughing like their lungs are trying to stage a prison break. Spoiler, they probably have tuberculosis. Half the village does. And historians still argue whether most commoners knew what diseases they had, or just assumed it was demons, bad air, or an unpaid tithe. You don't have time for illness, though. Today, you have to harvest turnips, or maybe you're repairing the fence around your lord's pasture. It doesn't really matter. You don't get to choose. A steward or bailiff gives you your task, and if you fail, you're fined or punished. You do your own farming only when you're done with their land. Your own food gets grown in the leftover moments of your day, like a sad little afterthought, kind of like office birthdays. You pass old Merrick, the village carpenter, who's nailing a horseshoe above his door to ward off bad spirits. A quirky medieval tidbit. People believed iron had protective properties, so horseshoes weren't just for horses. They were like low-tech home security systems. Merrick's also chewing something. It smells herbal. He says it's mugwort, for strength. It's actually a mild hallucinogen, but he insists it makes him immune to witchcraft. Down by the stream, someone's already washing linen. They're stomping on it barefoot in icy water while muttering about how her cousin married a man with 3 sheep and a millstone. That's basically aristocracy in this neighborhood. You briefly fantasize about marrying into that kind of power. But alas, you're probably already married, or betrothed. And if you're not, your parents are working on it, because marital love is sweet, but land and livestock are sweeter. You sneeze. Uh-oh. You hope no one heard that. It's 12:62, and sneezing without explanation might get you accused of having bad humors or consorting with imps. Better say a quick prayer or toss a pinch of salt over your shoulder, unless you can't afford salt. In which case, just look solemn and avoid eye contact. Your stomach grumbles. Breakfast isn't for another hour, and it's not much to look forward to. Remember that gray gruel we mentioned? You're going to want to lower your expectations even further, but we'll get to that soon. For now, your day has started, and it's not slowing down. You've got chores, aches, cold feet, and a general sense that life is just a slow march toward your own funeral, which, incidentally, will be attended by people wearing the same clothes they wore to milk the goats. Still, the sky's turning blue now. A thin sliver of sunlight hits the frost-covered grass. Birds chirp. For just a moment, it's almost peaceful. You stretch your sore arms and take in a breath of morning air, before promptly coughing because someone nearby is burning peat again, and it smells like a wet barn on fire. Welcome to the Middle Ages. You'll need luck, prayer, and possibly a horseshoe to make it past lunch. You squint into the morning light and rub your eyes, but there's no soft cotton towel or splash of cool, minty water to greet your waking face. Hygiene, as you know it, is several centuries and many plagues away. Here in medieval times, your grooming options are limited. In fact, grooming is more of a suggestion than a routine. Your village has a single communal well, and it's about a 10-minute walk. You could technically go rinse your face there, assuming no one's currently washing a goat in it. But let's be real. You'll probably just grab a bit of cold rainwater from a barrel outside your door and splash it on your cheeks, instantly regretting that choice because it smells faintly of turnips and something worse. You reach for your toiletry kit. Oh wait, there isn't one. Your toothpaste today is a mix of ash and salt, if you're lucky. Some people use powdered charcoal or ground sage. If you're fancy, you might even have access to stale wine for a rinse. Historians still argue whether this did more harm than good, but considering the alternatives, like scraping your teeth with twigs or animal bones, it was a real spa day. You pick up a frayed cloth and start dabbing your face. No mirrors in this hut, but you don't need one to know you look like someone who just survived a mugging by a haystack. Your beard, or chin if you're not the bearded type, itches, your skin feels both greasy and dry, and you have what can only be described as barnyard glow. But hey, by medieval standards, you're crushing it. Now, about your hair. Is it oily? Definitely. Flea-ridden? Almost certainly. People in this period often shaved parts of their head not for fashion, but as a defense against lice. And the ones who didn't, well, they had to live with the scratching. Or try rubbing herbs into their scalp, lavender, rosemary, or crushed onion, depending on what was in season. Imagine trying to flirt while smelling like salad dressing. Deodorant? Don't make me laugh. The smell of the Middle Ages is robust, pungent, a historical mixtape of sweat, animal dung, open wounds, wood smoke, and wet wool. You blend in best when you blend in aromatically too. If you smell too clean, people might think you're a heretic. Or worse, a foreigner. There were beauty standards back then, though, in case you were hoping to keep up appearances. Pale skin was all the rage among nobility. The peasants? Not so much. But sometimes, someone in your village gets ambitious and tries a beauty trick they heard about through rumor and goat cart gossip. Like the young woman in the next hut who smeared her face with ground chalk to look lighter. She also tried crocodile dung as a face mask, which is exactly what it sounds like. Yes, really. And no, don't ask where she got it. Let's all just be impressed. And if you're wondering about hair removal, yes, even medieval folks cared about that. Some rubbed rough stones along their skin. Others used arsenic-laced potions. A questionable choice, but hey, smooth legs are smooth legs, even if they burn. You glance around your hut. No privacy, of course. The concept of alone time doesn't really exist when you share your space with 5 other people, 3 chickens, a goat, and a large woven basket that may or may not contain last year's carrots. You learn to bathe, change, and suffer indignities, all while being casually stared at by a goat. His name is probably something like Huff or Nugget, and he's seen things. Bathing. Now there's a topic. You might get a real bath once a month, usually in a wooden tub. You boil water, pour it in, and take turns, oldest to youngest. So, if you're not the head of household, by the time it's your turn, the water looks like stew and smells like an old sock. And that's if your family is doing well that month. Some folks go entire seasons with nothing more than a damp cloth behind the ears. Communal bathhouses existed in towns, though not always for cleanliness. By the late Middle Ages, they were often seen as suspiciously social. So much so that a 14th century bishop once said, "A man should cleanse his soul, not his armpits." Sage advice if you never plan to sit next to anyone ever again. But you're rural. You're out here in the sticks. No bathhouse, no warm towels, no herbal oils. Just you, a bucket, some cold water, and your grim determination not to develop visible fungus before market day. Let's move on to cosmetics. Because yes, even in the mud and misery, some folks tried to get glamorous. Not you, necessarily, but you've seen it. Ladies with belladonna eye drops to make their pupils bigger, because large eyes were considered attractive. Fun fringe fact: belladonna is also poisonous, so side effects included blindness, vomiting, and sometimes death. But hey, all in the name of love. And men? They oiled their hair, perfumed their gloves, and tried to grow beards that screamed rugged yet courtly. unless you were a monk, in which case your job was to not look attractive. Hence the tonsure, the haircut where they shaved the top of the head and left a ring of hair like a medieval halo of "I gave up." You finish your morning routine with the faint hope that no fleas are currently crawling down your back. You scratch discreetly, unsuccessfully. Maybe later, if you're lucky, you'll catch a chicken and ask someone to help with a flea combing session. It's weirdly social, kind of like how we use sheet masks and talk about podcasts today. As you step outside again, you pass a neighbor trying to whiten her teeth by rubbing them with crushed oyster shells. She smiles. It's more unsettling than friendly. And honestly, you smile back. Because hygiene might be horrifyingly limited, but at least everyone's in it together. Your stomach reminds you, quite aggressively, that it's empty. You've had your splash of vaguely clean water to the face, your ash salt tooth scrub, and your daily ritual of trying not to scream at a goat. Now it's time for breakfast, or, as it's known in medieval peasant terms, the daily disappointment. You head back inside, where your household is gathered around a wobbly wooden table. Table might be generous. It's more like a plank balanced on two barrels. Someone's set out the morning meal, a pot of something grayish, steaming weakly, with the consistency of porridge and the aroma of sadness. This is gruel. Not just the metaphorical gruel your history teacher used to mention. Real, honest-to-goodness, oat-based, barely salted medieval gruel. It's made from whatever grains are left over from the weekly ration, likely barley or rye, and boiled down in water with a touch of animal fat if someone managed to save any. Flavoring is rare, but today you're lucky. Someone tossed in a wilted leek. It's like winning the breakfast lottery, if the prize were hot sludge with hints of onion. You grab a wooden spoon that still smells faintly of last week's turnip stew and dig in. It's warm, it's vaguely filling, and yes, there's something crunchy in it. Is it a toasted barley husk? A bug? You'll never know. You'll never want to know. You chew slowly, dream briefly of toasted bread, then accept your fate. As you eat, your household chats about the day's work. Who's mending fences? Who's gathering firewood? Who's milking the neighbor's goat because theirs ran off during the last storm and hasn't been seen since? Most of your meals revolve around this kind of chatter, punctuated by coughs, sniffles, and the occasional child quietly trying to sneak a second portion. Protein is scarce. If you're very fortunate, you'll have access to eggs now and then, or maybe dried fish if you live near a coast or a river. But meat is for holidays, or for people who own land rather than just labor on it. Historians still argue whether most peasants in Europe were truly protein-deprived year-round, or if some communities found clever ways to supplement with game, bugs, or even bone broths. Either way, you don't have time to argue. You've got a long day ahead, and gruel doesn't exactly fuel heroic feats of strength. You glance longingly at the bread shelf. There's a small round loaf there, probably baked 2 days ago and already hard enough to stop a thief. Bread is central to your diet. But here's the catch. It's mostly coarse rye or barley, not the fluffy white kind reserved for the clergy and nobility. This bread is dark, dense, and heavy enough to double as self-defense in an emergency. And it might not even be safe. Ever heard of St. Anthony's fire? That's what happened when people accidentally ate rye bread infected with ergot, a toxic fungus that caused hallucinations, convulsions, and, in extreme cases, death. It's a fun little bonus feature in your breakfast loaf. So yes, eating can be risky business. But today, no hallucinations. Just a dry crust you soften by dipping it into your gruel. You chew in thoughtful silence as the sun continues to rise, casting long golden lines through the warped glass window pane. Or, if you're lower on the ladder, just a hole in the wall stuffed with cloth. The conversation turns to market day. You might get to go, depending on whether your labor quota is met. Market day is a rare break in the monotony. Your chance to barter for salt, repair tools, or maybe grab a honey cake if you've squirreled away a few extra coppers. It's also a chance to hear gossip from other villages. Rumors about roaming knights, bandits, or, lately, a woman who cured a dog's limp with just a look, which has definitely got the local priest nervously quoting scripture. Someone mutters a blessing over the food, a short rhyme to thank whatever saints are trending this season. Religion permeates even your meals. Not because you're particularly devout, though many are, but because everyone is expected to be. The idea of separating daily life from the divine hasn't been invented yet. Eating is sacred, sleeping is sacred, and even sneezing is met with a chorus of God bless you before anyone even knows your name. After breakfast, someone tosses the food scraps into a small bucket, either for the pigs or for fermenting into the next batch of something. Medieval cooking is equal parts frugality and alchemy. That leftover bit of leek combined with yesterday's beer dregs and some herbs. Congratulations, it's now medicinal broth. You wipe your mouth on your sleeve because napkins haven't made it to your corner of the world, and stand up to start your chores. But first, you'll need to get dressed. You reach for your outer tunic, which smells faintly of smoke and sheep. You belt it with a bit of rope, slide on your mud-crusted shoes, and head toward the door. On your way out, you pass your younger sibling trying to scoop the last bit of porridge from the bottom of the pot. They're using a piece of stale bread as a spoon. You admire the creativity. Before you leave, you check the small sack hidden beneath a loose floorboard. Inside are the real treasures: a few dried apples, a broken comb, and 3 pebbles you think might be flint. You're not sure yet, but one of them sparked once, and you've been quietly obsessed ever since. Life doesn't give you many wins, so sometimes you make your own. Outside, the village is buzzing. Someone's arguing about a missing chicken. Someone else is teaching a toddler how to chase off crows. And someone, somewhere, is already halfway through their second bowl of gruel because they know a guy who knows a guy who stores extra oats in a hollow tree. Fringe fact? Some villagers actually did this. Oats, seeds, even coins, all stashed in trees, under floorboards, or hidden in old shoes. As you begin your morning labor, you can still taste the thin onion flavor of your breakfast. It's not glamorous, it's not gourmet, but it's enough to keep you upright. And around here, that's half the battle. Your tunic clings to your back as the morning mist gives way to a teasing sliver of sun. You bend to tighten the leather cords around your shoes, not that it helps much. They're less footwear and more suggestions of coverage. Thin leather, hand-stitched, fraying at the seams. Left shoe has a hole the size of a walnut, and right one feels like it's been harboring a pebble since last Michaelmas. You make a mental note to fish it out someday. Let's talk about what you're wearing. You've got on a linen undershirt. It used to be white. Now it's a muted beige that suggests a long-term relationship with grime. Over that, a coarse wool tunic in a color best described as bog brown. You might have a second tunic for holy days, but most peasants rotate the same outfit day after day, week after week, until the seams cry out for mercy. Wool is warm and cheap, but it's also itchy. Like, please make it stop, itchy. And you're not wearing underwear, because the concept exists, but it's still a luxury item. So everything scratches, everything chafes, and everything smells like it once belonged to someone more hygienic. The fun doesn't stop there. You have hose on your legs, not the sleek kind. Think medieval leggings, but less Lululemon and more potato sacks stitched by candlelight. They're held up by garters or luck, and they slip constantly as you work. You hike them up again and again, sighing every time. And yes, they're probably full of lice. Lice are not a sometimes thing. They are the thing. They live in your seams, your hair, your bedding, and if you're not scratching, it's because you're too tired. Fleas join the party in warmer months, and bed bugs make their seasonal debut like unwanted in-laws. People deal with it by boiling clothes in lye or vinegar, if they have either. Otherwise, they just cope. Historians still argue whether this level of infestation was considered a crisis, or just an annoying part of everyday life. Your outerwear is a cloak, wool again, naturally, fastened with a simple pin or leather tie. It offers minimal protection from rain unless it's been waxed. Yours hasn't. So now it's heavy, damp, and somehow smells of wet dog, despite the complete absence of dogs. Now, about fashion. Yes, even in this soggy world of toil and turnips, people care what they wear. Bright colors are a status symbol. Plant dyes are expensive and fade quickly, so the richer your tunic looks, the higher your station probably is. You're solidly in the earth tone bracket, but you still try. Maybe you've stitched a red thread into your sleeve as a splash of flair. Someone once told you it wards off evil. You didn't ask for proof. Across the village square, you spot the Reeves' wife. She's got on a headscarf with actual embroidery. Fancy. Married women usually keep their hair covered. Unmarried girls wear it loose or in braids. Your own hair, by the way, is still crunchy from that herbal rinse you used last week. Crunchy, but at least it's not crawling. Yet. You pass old Agnes, who's sewing patches into her husband's tunic with thread so thick it looks like twine. She smiles at you through 4 remaining teeth and says, "If it doesn't itch, it doesn't fit." Words to live by. Speaking of fit, medieval clothes are not tailored unless you're rich. Most peasant garments are T-shaped, baggy, and held together with belts or pins. If it tears, you patch it. If it falls apart, you cut it up for rags or repurpose it into, wait for it, baby diapers. There is no waste. Every scrap is reused, even if it smells faintly of soup and sheep. And don't get excited about laundry. Soap is handmade, often from animal fat and ash. Washing day is back-breaking work and only happens once every few weeks. So for the most part, your clothes are just lived in, sweated in, slept in, picked turnips in, and you get used to it. You have to. There's an unspoken social code to how you wear things, too. A hood pulled low might signal mourning. A torn sleeve could mean mourning, penance, or just clumsiness with a sickle. People read into these details like medieval Instagram stories. Gossip starts faster than a plague cough. Now for the really fun stuff. Accessories. You might own a belt knife, useful for cutting bread, trimming string, or defending yourself from angry geese. Maybe you wear a pouch with a dried herb inside, like rosemary or mugwort, to ward off illness. Or you carry a token, an amulet from a pilgrimage site, a carved bone charm, or a stone someone told you had healing powers. Science? Not quite. But hope is a kind of medicine. Quirky side note. Some people sewed tiny religious relics into their clothing, fragments of saints' bones, or fabric touched to a holy shrine. It's like carrying divine insurance. You'd love to have one, but the relic trade is expensive and sometimes shady. Plus, it's hard to verify authenticity when the bone of St. Lawrence looks suspiciously like a chicken leg. Your outfit complete, you trudge toward the fields, scratching your arm through the wool as you go. Every few steps, your hose slips down. You curse under your breath, but not too loudly. Blasphemy is punishable, and you don't want the priest giving you the eye again during Sunday Mass. You think longingly of silk. Nobles wear it, but so do clergy. It glides like water, gleams in the light, and, most importantly, doesn't itch. But even the thought of owning a scrap of silk is laughable. You'd have to marry up, rob a lord, or die dramatically enough to get buried in a gifted shroud. But for now, it's you, your scratchy wool tunic, your sagging hose, and your rapidly failing shoes. And a sense of pride, weirdly. Because despite all the discomfort, you're dressed for your time. You're surviving. And maybe, just maybe, you'll patch that hole in your shoe before winter. You feel it coming before it happens. A subtle gurgle, a low-pressure warning sign in your gut. Then, the grim realization dawns. Nature is calling, and there is no polite way to handle it in the Middle Ages. You look around. There are no bathrooms, no stalls, no fresh roll of lavender-scented toilet paper waiting behind a shiny chrome lever. Welcome to the privy problem. You've got options. None are good. The closest toilet is a communal latrine, a narrow, plank-covered pit dug a few feet behind your house, surrounded by woven wattle fencing and a healthy supply of buzzing flies. The smell? A combination of manure, human waste, and damp straw that permanently clings to your nostrils. The structure leans slightly to one side, like it knows it's one gust of wind away from becoming a very bad memory. You open the creaky wooden gate. Inside, there's a long beam with a hole cut in it. You sit, carefully, and do your business, trying not to think too much about what lies beneath. If you're lucky, it's just excrement and not a rat colony. Or worse, a rat colony with opinions. Wiping is a whole other adventure. Cloth is expensive and never wasted on something as fleeting as hygiene. So, what do you use? Moss, if you've gathered it. Leaves, if they're in season. Straw, if you're desperate. And in some towns, brace yourself, a communal rag on a stick that gets dipped in vinegar between uses. Yes, shared. Historians still argue whether this was truly a common practice or just a deeply unfortunate urban legend. But either way, the mental image is haunting. If the latrine's full, or frozen, you might resort to a chamber pot. Just a clay bowl, really, kept under your bed or by the hearth. At night, you crouch, aim, and hope. In the morning, someone, maybe you, maybe the unlucky youngest sibling, carries it outside to dump it in the designated waste ditch, or over the fence, or into the street if you're in a town and feeling bold. In cities, gong farmers handle the worst of it. They're paid to dig out and remove human waste from cesspits. It's a job so vile that they often work only at night and are required by law to live apart from everyone else. But they earn surprisingly decent wages because nobody wants their job. You consider this briefly as a career pivot before immediately thinking better of it. If you're in a castle, the arrangements might be fancier, but not by much. Castles have garderobes, stone cubbies built into the outer walls, with holes that drop straight down into the moat or the open air. Convenient? Sure. Sanitary? Not remotely. Imagine defending your keep during a siege, arrows flying, and someone above you flushes their lunch directly onto your helmet. Castle moats? Less pretty water feature, more open sewer. People used them for waste disposal, and the smell alone could serve as a defensive measure. Historians still debate how often moats were cleaned, or whether they were just left to ferment like some terrible soup of disease and regret. You exit the latrine, brushing flies away from your face, and head to the well to rinse your hands. There's no soap, just cold water, and maybe a handful of gritty sand if you want to exfoliate the medieval way. Germ theory hasn't been invented yet. People wash out of habit, piety, or social custom, not because they know about bacteria. You get the vague sense that you're still not clean. But again, standards are different here. You see a neighbor emptying their chamber pot into a trench that runs alongside the footpath. You step around it, expertly avoiding the splash zone. These trenches carry waste and rainwater through the village and occasionally overflow during storms. Children are warned not to play near them, but some do anyway. You try not to think about it when they hand you apples later. Sometimes, entire towns reek from improper waste management. In London, by the 14th century, the smell got so bad near the Thames that nobles petitioned to move court proceedings farther upriver. One chronicler described it as a great stench and abomination. That's polite medieval speak for smells like the devil's outhouse. Fun fact, in certain French cities, people would yell "Gardez-le," from the French "regardez-le," before tossing waste out the window. This gave pedestrians a generous 2-second warning to leap clear. Of course, if you were slow, distracted, or already ankle-deep in other surprises, it didn't help much. Fashion choices weren't immune to the privy problem either. If your tunic is too long, it drags. If your hose are too tight, they get in the way. More than one person has had an unfortunate accident involving tangled garters and bad timing. There's a reason some folks just hiked their garments up and let loose behind the nearest hedge. You once saw a friar relieve himself with the solemnity of prayer behind the churchyard wall. It struck you as deeply spiritual and also vaguely alarming. Even public punishments tied into all this. People caught defecating in sacred spaces could be fined or shamed. Some were forced to clean the area with bare hands while reciting penance. There's a dark irony there. Punishment for filth carried out in filth. And then there are the animals. Pigs roam freely in some villages, rooting through waste trenches for scraps. They're not picky. Dogs scavenge too. You once saw a goose make off with a used rag and honk triumphantly into the distance. You haven't looked at geese the same way since. But you adapt. You develop what modern folks might call poop radar. You learn where to walk, when to breathe, and how to hover over a latrine like your life depends on it. Because in some ways, it does. Poor sanitation leads to disease, and medieval disease doesn't mess around. The irony? Privies were a luxury. Most people in the countryside just went wherever they could find privacy. Trees, ditches, fields. Some places even used the edges of graveyards, because the land was technically unused. Just don't think too hard about that. You walk away from the latrine, hands dripping, stomach marginally less distressed, and with a newfound appreciation for indoor plumbing, even if you've never heard of it. You're still hungry, a little damp, and definitely itchy, but at least that's one medieval ordeal survived for the day. Now, back to work. There are crops to tend, and if you're unlucky, a dung heap that needs turning. You're hauling a sack of something suspiciously moist across a narrow, muddy path when you hear it. A hacking cough, deep and rattling, coming from the smithy. You pause. It's not the first one you've heard today, and it won't be the last. In fact, in a medieval village, coughs are basically the background music. You press onward, but a familiar unease starts to rise in your throat. Not because of the sound itself, but because you know what it means. Illness. Again. And in this era, illness doesn't mean popping a cold pill and binge-watching streaming shows for a day or two. No, it means possible death, definite pain, and maybe even a leech on your face before sundown. You're in the world before penicillin, before thermometers, even before bless you was said with genuine optimism. Disease is everywhere. You know this instinctively. You feel it in the air, in the grimy water barrels, in every handshake, or more likely, shoulder tap, because people know something passes from person to person, even if they don't understand the how. Your neighbor's daughter is lying in bed, pale and motionless. The local healer, who may or may not be a former sheep midwife, says it's the sweating sickness, or maybe it's camp fever. The names vary. The outcomes rarely do. You've seen the signs before. The high fevers, the red rashes, the bloated faces, and sometimes worse, blackened fingertips, leaking sores, or that telltale swelling in the groin. If that happens, it's the plague. And if it's the plague, well, best to start digging early. Let's talk about that. The plague, yes, that plague, rolls into town like a bad omen on horseback. You remember the first time you heard about it? A trader came through muttering about black boils, carts full of corpses, and entire villages wiped out. Historians still argue whether it came from the east via trade routes or through Genoese ships, but either way, it arrived like a nightmare. One day, people were alive and grumbling about soggy bread, and the next, they were corpses in hastily dug pits. You might think it's just the Black Death we should worry about. But oh no, medieval life is a buffet of biological betrayal. There's tuberculosis, typhoid, smallpox, leprosy, dysentery, ergot poisoning, and good old-fashioned food poisoning from that questionable stew someone left out for too long. A short list of symptoms includes fever, vomiting, hallucinations, unconsciousness, uncontrollable diarrhea, bleeding, and death, often in rapid succession. And how do you treat these things? Good question. The leading theory of the time is imbalanced humors. Your body is made up of 4 humors: blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile. Too much of one? Time to balance them out with a little medieval flair. Step 1. Bloodletting. A nice cut behind the knee or at the elbow, let it flow into a dish. That ought to calm the fever, right? You've watched this happen before. The barber surgeon, because of course barbers are also doctors, uses a knife that's seen more necks than soup bones. No gloves, no sterilization. Just faith and a very firm grip. Sometimes they use leeches instead, which are considered gentler. They're kept in jars and sold like little vampiric therapists. You've even heard of people applying them to their temples to relieve headaches. One unlucky lad in your village swears by it, though his left eye hasn't quite focused the same since. Step 2. Purging, which is a nice way of saying they'll give you something that causes intense vomiting or worse. Herbs, mostly, like hellebore, which works but can also kill you if the dosage is off. Spoiler alert, they rarely get the dosage right. Step 3. Smoke and odors. You burn herbs like rosemary, sage, or wormwood to clean the air. Sometimes people wear long-nosed masks stuffed with fragrant flowers, believing that bad smells carry disease. The plague doctor outfit, in fact, is more about filtering air through potpourri than offering any real protection. It's like trying to survive a wildfire by sniffing a daisy. Fringe tidbit. Some people believe that sitting in the sewers or sleeping with animals can cure disease, because apparently being around worse smells tricks your body into forgetting it's sick. You once saw a man roll in manure to sweat out the demons. He did sweat. He also itched for 3 weeks. In towns, hospitals do exist, but they're not what you'd expect. More spiritual retreat than treatment center. The idea is to give you a clean bed, pray over you, and prepare your soul for the afterlife. Actual medicine? Minimal. Bandages? Reused. Sterile? Never. But the monks do their best. Some even take notes, trying to understand symptoms and outcomes, planting the earliest seeds of something resembling science. In your village, though, it's different. If someone gets sick, you isolate them, far from the well, away from the fields. Not out of science, but fear. People start whispering about curses or moral failings. She didn't pray enough. He skipped the feast of St. Crispin. It's not personal. It's survival. The line between sin and sickness is blurry, and no one wants to be next. Still, there's a kind of resilience that grows from all this. People help each other, even if it's risky. They leave soup by the sick person's door. They whisper charms or bring protective talismans. You've seen your own mother hang garlic above the threshold. To keep away miasma, she said. It didn't help when your uncle coughed for 3 days and passed quietly in the night. You carry that memory with you. Like so many in your time, death is a constant presence. It doesn't arrive with drama. It comes with a shiver, a blotch, a small cough that doesn't go away. You've buried more than one friend before the age of 20. Today, as you walk past the smithy and hear that cough again, you don't say anything. You just nod, politely, and keep walking. Because if you stop to think too hard about it, you might not be able to keep going. And you have work to do. You pass the edge of the fields where the soil clings thick to your boots, and a familiar, humbling thought crosses your mind. You don't own any of this. Not the mud, not the grass, not even the onion you're eating raw like it's a delicacy. You're a serf, and that means you're technically closer to livestock than landlord. It's a rough reality to wake up to every morning, but it's your place in the grand medieval food chain, near the bottom, somewhere between plow and plague rat. Your lord owns the land, the harvest, the tools you borrow, and even a cut of your chickens if they lay particularly well this month. In exchange, you're allowed to live on a cramped plot, farm a few strips for your own food, and occasionally attend a feast where you get half a bowl of watery stew and an awkward seat next to the Reeves' cousin. Serfdom isn't exactly slavery, but it's not far off either. You're bound to the land, which sounds poetic, but basically means you can't leave the manor without permission. Want to move to the next village? Better have a really convincing story and a written pass. Want to become a monk and escape the dirt? Hope the Lord doesn't decide your back is more valuable than your soul. Your life is governed by obligation. There's a word for it. Corvée. Unpaid labor owed to your Lord. That might mean 3 days a week working his land, fixing fences, cleaning ditches, or hauling timber. On top of that, you owe tithes to the church, rents to the bailiff, fees for using the mill, and a lovely bonus tax if your pig crosses into the Lord's grain field, even if only to sniff. Historians still argue how rigid this system really was. Some lords were more lenient, others oppressive beyond reason. But for you, right now, it's a chain you wear every single day. A chain made of obligation, rules, and mud so sticky it could hold a cow. The worst part? You're born into it. Your father was a serf. His father, too. You inherit the status like a terrible family recipe. And unless something extraordinary happens, like a war, plague, or secret nobility bloodline you didn't know about, you're not going anywhere. Marriage? Also tied into your status. If you want to marry someone from another manor, you need the Lord's blessing, and maybe a payment or two. Love matches happen, sure, but they tend to come with contracts, livestock negotiations, and the occasional dispute over who gets to keep the larger turnip patch. You stop by the communal fields to help finish the haying. You work with others from your village, bending, sweating, and swatting at insects with the same weary rhythm. There's camaraderie here, strange as it seems. Shared suffering bonds people. You know who's got a limp, whose ox died last winter, who brews a strong nettle beer, and who can't sew a straight line to save their life. You laugh, complain, argue, then laugh again. And yes, there are moments when you forget how hard it all is. A break beneath a tree, a crude joke told by the miller's boy, the simple joy of a perfect breeze cutting through your wool tunic. These are the crumbs of peace that keep you going. Occasionally, someone in your village fantasizes out loud about escaping, running away to the forest to become an outlaw, joining a band of traveling merchants, becoming a monk, a nun, or even a soldier. It's all dangerous, possibly fatal, and statistically a terrible idea. But dreaming is free. And right now, it's all you can afford. A local priest once told you that labor is holy, that working the land brings you closer to God. You tried to believe him. You really did. But as your hands crack from cold and your back protests every step, you wonder if heaven's truly keeping count of who harvested the most cabbages. You finish your shift on the Lord's strip of farmland and trudge toward your own tiny plot. It's just a few rows of beans and cabbage, maybe a scrawny carrot or two. You crouch to pull weeds, murmuring half-formed prayers for rain, but not too much rain, and for the crows to stay far, far away. You installed a scarecrow last week. It's just a stick with a hood and a rotting turnip head. It doesn't work, but it scares you, so that's something. Even your tools aren't really yours. The plow belongs to the manor, and it's shared among multiple families. You book it like a dentist appointment, pray for dry weather, and if your neighbor's ox throws a tantrum that morning, too bad. You wait another week and hope the Lord doesn't decide to draft your family for bridge repairs. You can't hunt the Lord's forest. You can't fish his river. You can't gather more than a small bundle of firewood without permission. Technically, even collecting mushrooms can get you fined if you're not careful. You live in a world of boundaries and invisible fences. But here's a quirky twist. Some lords are actually decent. You've heard stories from a passing peddler of a baron who pardoned debts during a poor harvest, who let serfs hold festivals and even allowed his manor to host a midsummer fair. These lords are rare, almost mythic. Most lean toward the "I'll take your third best chicken for tax" side of management. You sit for a moment, watching the sun droop toward the trees. You're exhausted, covered in dust, and nursing a blister on your left palm. You remember a story told by an old man in the village about a serf who won his freedom by performing a song so beautiful it made the lady of the manor weep. Romantic nonsense, probably. Still, it sticks in your mind like a burr on wool. You get up, stretch your aching back, and walk home. A chicken follows you. You're not sure if it's yours. You're not sure if anything is yours, really, except this life. This muddy, aching, repetitive, fleeting life. It's yours, whether you want it or not. Your muscles scream as you climb the hill toward the training yard, your stomach still digesting cabbage and disappointment. You're here because, at some point, you thought, hey, maybe being a knight isn't so bad. You've seen them, glinting in polished armor, riding tall horses like medieval action figures. They look heroic, clean, possibly well-fed. You, on the other hand, are currently sweating through 3 layers of wool and trying to remember why you volunteered for this. Spoiler alert, you're not going to be a knight. Not in any full, sword-swinging, castle-owning sense. Becoming one isn't as simple as showing up with enthusiasm and a big stick. It's a career path, long, expensive, brutal, and one you're about 10 generations too poor to attempt. Knighthood begins early, real early. Boys from noble families are sent off at age 7 to train as pages, serving under a knight or lord. They learn to ride, fight, and recite proper table manners while cleaning up after horses and getting yelled at in Latin. By 14, they become squires, essentially knight interns. They carry armor, clean weapons, and occasionally get their noses broken during training accidents. If they survive to 21 without maiming or humiliation too severe, and if they're of noble birth, they might get dubbed as knights. You are not of noble birth. You don't even know what your birth certificate would say, because literacy isn't exactly widespread among your peers. What you can do is train for the militia or man-at-arms work, essentially the discount version of knighthood. You don't get a coat of arms. You don't get a squire. You don't even get decent armor unless someone dies and you inherit it. And no one's dying for your benefit today. You pick up a wooden practice sword and start swinging, as instructed by a leathery man named Wulfric. He's got 3 fingers on one hand, 1 ear, and a limp that's become part of his swagger. Wulfric's job is to make sure you don't kill yourself while learning to swing something heavier than a kitchen ladle. "Keep your legs wide," he barks. "You fight like a goose in a hailstorm." You adjust your stance. Your knees crack. This is fine. Armor, when you get to try it, is a nightmare. It's not sleek or gleaming. It's heavy, dented, and smells like the last 5 men who wore it. The chainmail alone weighs 20 to 30 pounds, and that's before you add the padded gambeson underneath, the helmet that restricts your vision, and the plate armor over key areas like the chest and shins. Moving in it is like trying to swim in a metal sleeping bag. The heat? Awful. The chafing? Constant. The breathing? Labored. You try not to fall over while practicing shield blocks, but your left leg starts to twitch involuntarily. You're told this is normal, encouraging. Still, there's a kind of rhythm to the drills. You swing, block, shuffle, repeat. And somewhere in the middle of all that effort, a bizarre thing happens. You start to feel tough. Not night tough, not poetry-worthy tough, but maybe like someone who wouldn't instantly perish in a tavern brawl. You glance over at the actual knight overseeing training today. He's wearing armor polished to a near-mythical shine and giving instructions with the detached confidence of someone who hasn't had to dig their own latrine in years. His name is Sir Aldrich. He smells faintly of wine, rosewater, and the kind of soap that probably contains whale fat. He owns land. He eats meat more than twice a week. He even has boots with proper soles. That's luxury. Knights are sworn to uphold chivalry, a noble code involving bravery, honor, protecting the weak, and being devout in faith. Sounds nice, right? But historians still argue whether chivalry was ever more than an ideal. In reality, many knights were violent, entitled, and half-drunk on power. Stories of knights protecting the innocent sit awkwardly next to reports of them looting towns and smacking peasants for fun. You've seen both kinds. There's Sir Aldrich, respected, clean-shaven, terrifying in a friendly way. And then there's Sir Godwin, who once demanded a toll from every peasant crossing the village bridge, including a one-legged beggar. Godwin also owes 3 pigs to the bishop and hasn't paid up in months. Let's not forget tournaments. Those jousts and melees that look so romantic in tales. They're chaotic, bruising brawls. Knights bash each other off horses for glory, for coin, or just because they're bored. You're not allowed to participate, but you get to clean up afterward, fetching splintered lances and dragging off dazed squires. You take a break and sip some water, lukewarm and vaguely mossy. You watch others train, some clumsy, some promising. There's always one lad who's too enthusiastic, swinging like he's auditioning for a tavern play. He'll probably hurt himself before sunset. And yet, despite the sweat, pain, and near-zero chance of advancement, you keep training. Because even the idea of being near a knight is better than life in the fields. You dream of standing guard at the manor gate, of wearing a proper sword on your hip, of someone looking at you and seeing more than dirt and calluses. Maybe you'll become a man-at-arms, a professional soldier serving a knight or noble. You won't own land, but you'll be fed. You'll get basic armor, a salary of sorts, and if you're lucky, a share of loot from any campaigns. You know a guy who did it. Lost a toe. Gained a reputation. Seems like a fair trade. Even the castle guard started somewhere. You remind yourself of this as you practice again, this time with a wooden shield that smells like mildew and trauma. Your arm aches. Your legs wobble. But you press on. Because even if you never become a knight, you want to be something more than a name scrawled in soot on a village wall. And in a world like this, that's all the glory you'll ever need. You wake up in the middle of the night with a throbbing pain in your jaw. At first you think maybe you bit down on something weird at dinner, like that tiny pebble in the crusty bread you pretended not to notice. But then the ache pulses again, sharp and searing, and you realize it's a tooth. And not just any tooth. It's the tooth. That back molar you've been quietly ignoring for months. The one that started aching when you chewed anything tougher than porridge. The one that's been turning a troubling shade of gray. Well, congratulations. Tonight, it's staging a full medieval mutiny. You know what this means. You'll have to visit the village tooth drawer, not a dentist. That title's at least 600 years and several sterile tools away. This is a guy named Oswin, who also brews beer, sharpens knives, and once stitched up a goat with twine. He owns a pair of iron tongs, a lot of enthusiasm, and exactly 0 training. But he's the best you've got. Morning comes, and you shuffle through the misty streets, cradling your jaw like it's a sacred relic. People give you knowing looks. Everyone's had a run-in with Oswin at some point. You pass a woman with a lopsided grin. She nods. You nod back, in pain solidarity. You arrive at Oswin's hut. It smells like yeast, iron, and regret. He greets you cheerily, possibly drunk, and beckons you inside. The chair is just a stool with one leg shorter than the others. The anesthesia is a mug of something strong, likely beer mixed with cloves, garlic, and lies. You drink it. It burns. Your gums tingle, your vision wobbles, and you start to feel like maybe this isn't a great idea. But then he shows you the tongs. They're rusted. They look more like fireplace tools than medical instruments. You suddenly develop a new appreciation for modern dentistry, even if you've never experienced it. Oswin mutters a quick prayer, either for you or himself, and braces your head against the doorpost. Then he goes in. The pain is indescribable. You make sounds you didn't know you were capable of. The process is messy, imprecise, and fueled entirely by guesswork and brute force. Finally, with a wet pop and a triumphant grunt, he yanks the tooth free. It's a horror show of blood and nerve endings. He drops it in a bowl and holds it up like a trophy. You're too dazed to care. He presses a bit of rag soaked in vinegar to your gum. That's the antiseptic. Sort of. Some people use wine, or spit, or honey. Historians still debate how effective these methods were. Spoiler, not very. You try not to move your tongue too much. It hurts. Everything hurts. But at least the tooth is out. You stagger home with a lopsided jaw and a head full of pain-induced wisdom. Dental care in the Middle Ages isn't just bad, it's basically non-existent. People don't prevent problems. They endure them. The lucky ones rub crushed herbs or salt on their gums. Some chew mint or licorice roots to freshen their breath. But that's more about smell than hygiene. Tooth decay is rampant, especially among the rich who can afford sugary imported treats. Ironically, peasants like you might have better teeth overall, less sugar, more hard bread. But once something goes wrong, there's nowhere to turn but Oswin and his terrifying tongs. If you lived in a larger town, you might find a barber surgeon. These guys do it all: bloodletting, bone setting, amputation, dentistry. Their shops often display a bowl of bloody water outside as a kind of advertisement. It's the origin of the red and white barber pole, though much less whimsical when you see it in person. Some medieval physicians believe toothaches are caused by toothworms, tiny creatures that burrow inside and gnaw from within. The idea makes no scientific sense, but it becomes popular. Treatments include burning herbs in your mouth to smoke the worm out. You once saw a man do this. He ended up with second-degree burns on his tongue and still lost the tooth. Other remedies are more mystical. There are charms to wear, prayers to whisper, even special stones that supposedly soothe oral pain when held close. One such stone, rumored to come from a saint's tomb, made the rounds in your region last spring. You touched it. Your tooth still hurt. But for a moment, you felt less alone. Of course, none of this addresses what happens if your jaw swells, your gums abscess, or the infection spreads. In those cases, it often becomes a death sentence. Sepsis doesn't care how many cloves you chew. People die from toothaches. A small thing becomes the final straw. After your visit to Oswin, you spend the afternoon in a haze. Your face is numb in places that shouldn't be numb. You try to eat porridge, but give up halfway. You spit blood into a cloth and decide it might be time to consider going celibate forever if it means never kissing anyone with exposed nerves again. Still, it could have been worse. You've heard stories of desperate folks hammering their own teeth out with rocks, or having them yanked mid-fever while restrained by relatives. One man used a fish hook. Another tried to pull it out using a string and a door, and now whistles every time he speaks. You lie down that night, sore but slightly proud. You survived a medieval dental appointment. That's not nothing. Your jaw will ache for days, but the worst is over. Probably. And if it isn't? Well, Oswin says he just sharpened his tongs. You shuffle to the chapel at sunrise, your jaw still throbbing faintly from yesterday's medieval tooth massacre. But you're not here for healing, though heaven knows you need it. You're here because the church owns you, spiritually, economically, socially. Every aspect of your life bows, scrapes, and genuflects beneath its spired shadow. The chapel is small, built from rough stone, its wooden door creaking like it's afraid of the sermon. You step inside, along with a dozen others. You sit on a cold bench, or stand, depending on your status, and look toward the altar, where the priest is already muttering in Latin. You don't understand a word. That's normal. Most sermons sound like someone chanting over a bowl of porridge, but you nod respectfully and pretend to follow along, because pretending is part of your salvation plan. Religion isn't just a belief here. It's your calendar, your doctor, your landlord, your news source, and your worst guilt trip rolled into one. It tells you when to fast, when to feast, when to confess, and when to feel terrible for everything you've ever thought. Your days are wrapped in layers of ritual, from crossing yourself in front of sacred trees to avoiding meat on Fridays. Not that you could afford meat on any day. The church controls your soul, yes, but it also controls your wallet. Every year, you pay a tithe, 10% of your produce or earnings. No exceptions. Didn't have a good harvest? Too bad. Pay up in grain, eggs, or livestock. Skip a tithe, and your name goes on the priest's problematic souls list, right alongside old Theobald, who once said something sarcastic about St. Cuthbert and was struck by lightning 2 weeks later. Coincidence? The villagers think not. And if you're caught stealing, lying, or, God forbid, dancing inappropriately on a feast day, your punishment isn't just public shame. It's divine shame. Sometimes even physical punishment. Stocks, lashes, or forced pilgrimage. The church doesn't just want your obedience, it wants your fear. There's something you've always found a little unsettling about the way the priest looks at the congregation. Not in a malicious way. More like someone who knows what you did last summer, and probably last night. You try to keep your head low. Historians still argue whether medieval villagers were deeply devout or just outwardly obedient. But one thing's clear. The power of the church is woven into everything. You confess to the priest, even if he's related to the guy you're complaining about. You fear purgatory more than debt. You believe demons might enter your home through cracked windows. And when the wind howls at night, you cross yourself and murmur an Ave Maria, just in case. The walls of the chapel are painted with vivid images. Saints pierced with arrows, devils tormenting the greedy, and angels looking suspiciously judgmental. The artwork isn't just decoration, it's education. You can't read, but you can understand the visual message. Be good, or spend eternity getting roasted like a heretic at midsummer. You glance at the priest's robes, rich velvet, embroidered, a stark contrast to your patched tunic. The chalice he uses is silver, possibly gold-plated. He wears a ring. His shoes are clean. How? Nobody knows. You once joked that maybe the priest floats slightly above the ground. No one laughed. A boy got slapped for even smiling. Outside the chapel, the church's power is even more visible. It owns land, a lot of it. In some places, it's the single largest landowner. Entire villages pay rent to monasteries, and some monks have more wealth than knights. They keep bees, brew ale, and copybooks worth more than your entire farm. You once peeked into a scriptorium and saw a monk painting a tiny golden halo onto a saint's head. You wanted to ask questions, but silence is expected, especially from someone with mud on their shoes. The church controls education too. If you want to learn to read, Latin is your only ticket, and monks are the gatekeepers. You know a boy from another village who joined a monastery. He gets bread, wine, and a clean robe every day. But he also wakes up at 4 a.m., prays 7 times a day, and hasn't spoken to a woman in 3 years. Trade-offs. Then there are trials. Yes, actual trials, where the church plays judge, jury, and sometimes very creative executioner. Say you're accused of stealing a loaf of bread or blaspheming by accident. You might be tried by ordeal. One option, plunge your hand into boiling water to retrieve a stone. If your hand heals cleanly in 3 days, you're innocent. If it festers, you're guilty. Shocking, most people turn out to be guilty. especially if the priest didn't like your tone last Sunday. Or you might be asked to carry a red-hot iron bar for a few paces. Again, same healing test. These are called ordeals of fire or water, and they're terrifying. Eventually, they were phased out, mostly because even the church realized that setting people on fire didn't actually produce reliable results. But in your lifetime, they're still a real threat. You've seen people accused of minor offenses go into church courts and come out branded. One man had to walk through town with a placard saying, "I lied in confession." Another was banned from eating meat for a year. Sounds mild until you remember there's not much else to eat. And let's not forget the Inquisition, a creeping shadow from across the continent. Word reaches your village now and then, tales of inquisitors in black robes asking dangerous questions about faith, heresy, and who's been reading things they shouldn't. A merchant once muttered something about a forbidden book and was never seen again. People say he joined a monastery. Others say the church helped him join something else entirely. But there's also comfort in religion. Weirdly, familiar prayers, familiar rituals. The cycle of saints' days gives structure to the chaos. You might not understand the theology, but you understand the rhythm. You kneel, you fast, you feast, you sing badly. You feel like you're part of something bigger, if not by choice, then by design. You exit the chapel and nod to the priest. He blesses you with a hand that smells faintly of incense and very faintly of wine. You walk away lighter in the soul, heavier in obligation. Because in the end, the church isn't just about belief. It's the thread that stitches your whole world together. Sometimes comforting, sometimes suffocating. Always there, like mud on your boots, or taxes. The workday finally ends. Sort of. You've been up since dawn, and your back is a stiff, knotted tapestry of regrets. But now comes the question on every medieval villager's mind. What counts as fun? You shuffle into the village square, where a few fires are already crackling and smoke curls into the amber dusk. Children run barefoot through the mud, chasing a wooden hoop with a stick. You watch one fall, cry, and then immediately return to the game like nothing happened. That's medieval resilience. Or maybe just medieval parenting. Tonight, there's entertainment. You try not to get your hopes up. In your time, entertainment doesn't mean movies, music festivals, or late-night reality TV. It means whatever can be done with fire, beer, animals, and questionable levels of supervision. You find a spot near the main gathering space where a small crowd has formed. A man in a tattered green tunic is juggling knives. 3 of them. You lean forward as he tosses them into the air, too high by the look of it, and wince as one clatters to the dirt. He bows anyway. The audience claps politely, more out of gratitude that no one lost an eye. Then comes the real headliner, bear baiting. Yes, bear baiting. A pastime that even some medieval folks find a little rough around the edges. A chained bear is led into the square, fur matted, eyes tired, and a pack of dogs is released to harass it. The bear swipes, growls, dodges. The dogs nip and bark, trained for exactly this kind of performance. There's no escape for either side. It's not about winning. It's about spectacle. The crowd whoops. Beer sloshes. Someone starts playing a lute, poorly. Children cheer. The village priest stands quietly in the back, pretending to disapprove while subtly placing a wager on the bear. Historians still argue whether rural communities enjoyed these shows as communal bonding or were just desperately bored. Probably both. You wince as a dog gets batted through the air, yelping. The bear drools and pants. You stare too long and feel a bit sick. But this is what passes for a good time. Some nights, you'll get a puppet show or a wandering minstrel with questionable morals and an even more questionable loot. Once, a man came through town with a trained monkey. It rode a goat. People talked about it for weeks. That monkey had more charisma than the local reeve. There are also morality plays, short dramas meant to scare you into behaving. A few villagers put on robes and masks, pretending to be greed, pride, or lust. Lust always gets the best lines. At the end, they all fall into a big fake hellmouth and everyone claps, relieved that sin is, once again, defeated by shouting in rhymed couplets. You once saw a play where death was played by the butcher's cousin, and he scared 3 toddlers so badly one of them peed in a basket. Honestly, best performance of the season. Other times, there are feasts, rare, but magical. On saints' days or after a good harvest, the Lord might open the manor gates and allow the village to feast in his courtyard. Not inside, of course, but near enough to see the tapestries. You eat spiced pottage, honey cakes, and maybe, get a sliver of roast meat. Minstrels play. People dance. You almost forget about your blisters and back pain. But feasts are rare. Most nights, the fun you get is homemade. Drinking with friends around the fire. Telling stories so wild they circle all the way back to believable. Playing simple games like knuckle bones, a sort of medieval dice using sheep joints. Or pitching pennies, which is mostly about seeing who can throw coins closest to a wall without losing them in the mud. You remember once sneaking into a dice game with the Reeves' son. You lost 2 coppers and a shoe, and still consider it a good night. Then there's music. Simple flutes, hurdy-gurdies, bagpipes if someone's feeling bold. Songs about love, war, livestock, and various sins disguised as metaphors. You learn the lyrics through repetition, humming along with cracked voices and tankards raised. Someone near the fire begins singing now. Something about a maiden, a knight, and an extremely symbolic swan. You don't catch every verse, but the melody is familiar, comforting, like a lullaby wrapped in hay and spilled ale. Of course, not everyone gets to enjoy these festivities. If you're working in the manor's kitchen, or tending a sick relative, or just too tired to move, you sit on the sidelines. But even then, you watch the flames flicker and listen to the laughter, and feel a little less alone. A few villagers whisper gossip about who's been seen sneaking behind the hay barn, who's secretly hoarding apples, who might be a witch. Nothing serious. Yet. But you file the names away, just in case. And speaking of gossip, you hear someone mention a rumor that next week a traveling fair might pass through the neighboring village. Exotic goods, fire breathers, maybe even a man who can read palms. You don't know if it's true, but the idea alone is exciting enough to make you forget your aching knees. The bear is led away, growling softly. One of the dogs limps behind. A few villagers start picking up empty mugs and heading home. The night is winding down, but for a few brief hours you were entertained, distracted, almost happy. You walk back through the dark village paths, the mud cold and soft underfoot. Someone stumbles behind you, giggling, and vanishes into the shadows. Somewhere, a lute twangs a final sour note, and tomorrow you'll wake up and do it all again. Because fun is fleeting, but the chores are eternal. You're in the field, ankle deep in mud, minding your own business when someone's chicken drops dead. Just keels over right there next to the turnip cart. Within minutes, 2 villagers are whispering about omens. By midday, a child has a nosebleed and an old woman sneezes twice in a row, and suddenly someone's muttering witchcraft. You glance nervously toward the edge of the village, where the hedge witch lives. Agnes, with her knotty fingers, jars of herbs, and alarming collection of dried bird feet hanging from her rafters. She's healed your mother's cough and helped birth half the children in town. But that was last month. Today, she's a suspect. In medieval times, when something strange happens, weather, illness, spoiled ale, a pig that won't stop circling, it's not your first instinct to call it bad luck. It's someone's fault, and the list of usual suspects is tragically short. A woman who talks to herself? Suspicious. Keeps to herself? Very suspicious. Owns a black cat? Why even bother with a trial? You've seen it unfold before. The shift from curiosity to suspicion is quiet, almost polite at first. People cross themselves when she passes. Bread is refused from her hand. Then someone says it out loud. She's different. And that's all it takes. Witchcraft accusations don't start with cauldrons and broomsticks. They start with small things. A cow stops giving milk. A thunderstorm ruins the barley. A man dreams of frogs. And suddenly, the village needs a scapegoat. Historians still argue just how widespread and organized witch hunts were in early medieval Europe. Some say rural communities were slower to adopt formal prosecutions. Others claim the roots ran deep even before the infamous Inquisitions. What's clear is that fear spreads faster than logic, and it doesn't need a trial to ruin a life. You remember the last accusation. A woman named Elfrida was blamed after 3 sheep miscarried on the same day. She was old, toothless, and liked to chant old songs while walking. That was enough. The village elders demanded a test, trial by water. They tied her hands and feet, lowered her into the river, and waited. The belief was simple. Water, as a pure element, would reject a witch. If she floated, she was guilty. If she sank, she was innocent, and also likely dead. Medieval justice was not big on second chances. Elfrida floated. They said the devil held her up. She was dragged out coughing, bruised, and terrified. You never saw her again. Maybe she fled. Maybe not. The village moved on. Now, as the chicken's death ripples through your neighbor's gossip circles like a dropped stone, you hear Agnes's name mentioned in hushed tones. She gave someone a bad herbal mix. Her brew didn't help that man's fever. Her weather prediction was wrong. You feel a pang of guilt. She gave you willow bark when your tooth hurt. She warned you not to eat those red berries last autumn. She smiled at your sister when she was sick and promised she'd recover. And she did. But right now, reason doesn't matter. Fear does. You try to focus on your work. You weed your strip of land with trembling fingers, hoping the storm clouds gathering overhead will pass quickly. A sudden gust sends your hood flying back, and someone mutters behind you, "The wind's been strange lately." You don't turn around. Sometimes accusations are spurred by jealousy or old grudges, a refused marriage proposal, a cow that wandered and didn't return, a failed crop. One man accused his mother-in-law of witchcraft because his soup tasted odd. Another because he dreamed of her standing at the foot of his bed. Sleep paralysis? Maybe. Or maybe he just couldn't face the guilt of eating the last pickled herring without sharing. Some communities require more formal tests. A witch's mark, a blemish, mole, or scar believed to be a demon's teat. A physical inspection is ordered, often by someone who has no medical knowledge and a loose understanding of anatomy. Privacy isn't part of the deal. There are also pricking tests, where the accused is jabbed with a needle to find insensitive spots. If you don't flinch, it's a sign. Not because you're brave, mind you, but because the devil numbed the area. Pain, or lack of it, is damning either way. One fringe belief, thankfully rare, is that witches can be exposed by baking their urine into bread and feeding it to a dog. If the dog reacts, guilty. If not, well, the dog's fine, but you've still eaten pea bread, and there's really no coming back from that. You glance up as Agnes walks past the square. People quiet. A child hides behind their mother's skirts. She walks slowly, her face unreadable, carrying a basket of nettles and herbs. No one says hello. You feel it, the shift in the air, like a stage has been set, like a curtain is being drawn. That night, people gather in whispers. Not official, not yet. But you hear words like warning, caution, better safe than sorry. You hear the priest mention dark forces in his evening prayers. The villagers nod solemnly. It feels less like religion and more like a loaded crossbow. You sit in your corner of the hut, turning a spoon over and over in your hands. You want to speak. Say it's nonsense. Say she helped you. Say maybe the chicken just died because chickens are fragile, ridiculous birds with no sense of survival. But you don't. Because in the Middle Ages, silence is safer than sense. And you know what happens to those who speak too loudly on behalf of the accused. You lie in bed that night listening to the wind whip through the trees and wonder if it's the storm coming, or the villagers. Morning brings a cold drizzle and the unmistakable smell of damp hay and human doubt. You roll off your scratchy straw mattress, feeling every bruise and splinter as you shuffle to the door. Your head is heavy, not from drink, but from dread. Last night's whispers about Agnes haven't died down. If anything, they've spread, like mold on last week's bread. But today, you've got other problems. You've been summoned to the castle. Not for punishment, thankfully. You're helping with repairs. Something about the upper ramparts and a collapsed garderobe chute. You don't ask questions. You just put on your least wet tunic, grab your patched boots, and go. Castles, from a distance, always look like fairy tales. Stone towers rising out of the mist, flags snapping in the wind, imposing walls that promise safety and power. But the moment you get close enough to smell them, the illusion shatters. Castles are not cozy. They're cold, damp, echoing monuments to discomfort. You pass through the outer gate, nod to the grumbling guards, and make your way up a twisting stone staircase so narrow your shoulders brush the walls. It's a relief when you finally emerge onto the battlements, until the wind slaps you like an unpaid bar tab. You squint out over the countryside. From up here, you can see the village. Tiny roofs, curling chimney smoke, fields the color of old soup. It looks peaceful. It's not. The stone beneath your feet is slick with rain. You sidestep a puddle and narrowly miss stepping in something less watery. One of the castle boys is sweeping muck toward a hole in the wall. "Don't stand there," he mutters. "That's the drop chute." Right. The guardrobe. Medieval castles didn't have indoor plumbing, but they had gravity. You remember now. Waste chutes built right into the outer walls. A bench with a hole in it, sometimes with 2 seats. Because why not socialize? And a vertical shaft that empties directly into the moat or a pit. A glorified cliffside outhouse. Charming. You peer down the shaft for half a second too long and immediately regret it. The smell is a permanent resident. It's also drifting through the castle like a stubborn ghost. You now understand why nobles carry those little scented sachets around their necks. You wish you had one stuffed with mint, lavender, or outright denial. You duck back inside through a thick oak door with iron hinges and enter the great hall. It's majestic, sure. High ceilings, tapestries fluttering, a fire roaring at one end. But it's also surprisingly smoky. The chimney design? Not great. And the smoke hangs around the rafters like it's trying to decide who to haunt next. The floor's covered in rushes, straw mixed with herbs and occasionally dry flowers. In theory, it keeps things clean. In practice, it hides food scraps, bones, spilled ale, and the odd lost item. You once heard of someone finding a small knife and a dead mouse in the rushes on the same day. The walls are stone, of course. Beautiful, but cold. No insulation. In winter, your breath fogs inside. Windows are slits, more for defense than light. A few are covered in oiled parchment to block wind, but most are just open. So the great hall is a place where you're both sweating near the fire and freezing from the waist down. The noble family sits at the raised dais, separated from you by height, wealth, and several metaphors. The Lord eats roasted game and drinks wine. You eat barley bread and sip thin beer from a cracked cup. The class divide, very real. If the castle is a spine of power, you are somewhere near the tailbone. You've heard tales that noble women bathe in milk, maybe once a year. You've also heard they sleep on feather beds with woolen covers embroidered with silver thread. You can't confirm, but you do know the scullery maid says the chamber pots upstairs overflow during feasts, and someone has to empty them into the moat, usually her. Speaking of which, castle moats are the medieval equivalent of a very unappetizing soup. Defensive, yes, but also where waste, dead animals, and sometimes the odd political problem ends up. The water doesn't flow. It stagnates. On hot days, it smells like punishment. And if you're defending the castle during a siege, that's the water you drink. Cheers. You're tasked with helping rebuild a section of the guardrobe's outer chute. Part of it crumbled in last week's storm. A stone mason barks instructions at you while you haul rocks and smear mortar with your already cracked hands. You can't help but think, if this thing collapses again, someone's going to fall straight into history's worst plumbing. While you work, you eavesdrop. Nobles talk about a cousin's arranged marriage, a shipment of spices from the east, a recent execution done tastefully. You wonder what that means. You don't ask. One servant whispers about the oubliette, a dungeon pit where prisoners are thrown and forgotten. You once peeked into it. Nothing but darkness and the faint smell of iron. It's a reminder that castles aren't just homes, they're fortresses, and sometimes prisons, and occasionally very well-decorated death traps. After hours of hauling stone, you're sent to help in the kitchens. You duck past swinging doors into a flurry of fire, shouting, and hot broth. The head cook yells something about burning the goose. A scullion drops a plate. Someone slips on a spilled eel. Yes, eel, a noble delicacy. You try not to touch anything that moves. The kitchen is alive. Smoke, meat, flour, sweat. It smells incredible and vaguely alarming. You help carry a platter of roasted turnips and honey-glazed carrots to the great hall. You don't get to eat any, of course, but you might lick your fingers afterward. Finally, the day ends. You're allowed to rest in a small corner of the lower hall where castle servants sleep. It's dark, drafty, and someone nearby is snoring like a wounded bear. But you're indoors. You're dry. You're not ankle-deep in a moat. Still, you shiver under a scratchy wool blanket and think, castles aren't magical. They're just giant stone boxes with fancy chairs and slightly more organized chaos. And in the morning, someone has to clean the guardrobe again. Please, let it not be you. You're woken at dawn by shouting, panicked, urgent, the kind of yelling that says something's gone horribly wrong. You sit up fast, heart already pounding, as the news hits your ears like a slap. The Lord's banner is being raised. That can only mean one thing: war. Or, more accurately, your Lord has decided to join a campaign. Maybe it's part of a larger feud. Maybe the king summoned his vassals for a noble cause, or just a land dispute with really dramatic branding. Either way, you're not invited to the strategy table. You're needed in the mud. You're not a trained soldier, but you're fit enough to swing a blade and expendable enough that nobody will miss you if you don't return. So you're handed a spear, wooden shaft, iron tip, already a little bent, a dented helmet that smells of someone else's fear, and a boiled leather jerkin that's definitely 2 sizes too small. Your armor is basically hope strapped to your chest. You march in a line with other drafted men, farmers, blacksmiths, even the guy who usually fixes buckets. No one looks confident. The village priest blesses you with holy water and a nervous twitch, then recites a prayer about glory and sacrifice. You try to focus on the glory part. Marching to war sounds dramatic in ballads, but in reality, it's mostly blisters, hunger, and squabbling over who gets to ride on the single communal ox cart when their feet give out. You sleep outdoors, chew hard bread that tastes like wood, and try not to fall into the river when crossing on foot. You don't know where you're going, only that you'll be there for a while and probably lose a toe. After a few days of trudging through rain and rumors, you reach a makeshift camp. Tents flapping, smoke rising, soldiers shouting and sharpening blades. You're handed a wooden bowl of soup that's more water than flavor and a chunk of bread that has clearly been dropped at least once. You eat it gratefully. War camp hygiene is, predictably, appalling. Latrines are barely marked, lice are thriving, and no one's had a real bath since they left their village. You're starting to miss your own stinky straw mattress. Here, sleep is a luxury, privacy is a myth, and someone will snore directly into your ear. A grizzled soldier gives a speech before battle. It includes words like honor, loyalty, and cleaving. You stop listening around the part where he says, If you run, they'll cut you down from behind. Excellent. Just the confidence boost you needed. When the fighting begins, it's chaos. You expected cinematic clashes, knights on horseback, gallant charges, drums of war. What you get is mud, shouting, confusion, and people slipping on their own shields. Arrows rain down with a sickening hiss. One whizzes past your ear and makes a thock sound in someone else's chest. You jab your spear into the melee, not even sure who you're hitting. You fall twice. Your foot goes numb. You drop your shield and immediately regret it. The air is thick with smoke, sweat, and the coppery tang of blood. Somewhere nearby, a man is screaming for his mother. You survive, barely. You think. Hard to tell. You lie face down in a puddle of rain and someone else's boot print, blinking at the sky, wondering if your arm's broken or just emotionally done. The battle ends as suddenly as it began. The survivors limp back to camp. The dead are left for someone else to worry about. You sit, drenched and shaking, gnawing on a piece of jerky you found in the mud. You think it's jerky. Your reward? Nothing really. Maybe some coin, maybe a nod of approval from a tired knight. If you're lucky, you won't catch dysentery. Oh yes, dysentery, the silent killer of the medieval army. Forget swords and arrows. Your real enemy is disease. Water in the camp is contaminated. Food is half-cooked. Cuts go septic. And no one knows the word sanitation. You drink from a stream, get stomach cramps, and hope you don't die before breakfast. Some men desert. Some go mad. Some never even make it to battle. They collapse from exhaustion along the way. You wonder, briefly, if this is what those grand songs of war meant when they spoke of glory. Because right now, all you feel is mud in your ears and a persistent itch under your armor. Historians still argue how much peasant levies really contributed to medieval warfare. Some say they were essential in numbers. Others argue they were little more than fodder. You're starting to see both sides. Then there's the looting. After a battle, what's left behind is up for grabs. You scavenge a better belt, a half-full flask, and a helmet with a dent that looks vaguely poetic. One man walks away with 3 spoons and a ring. He says it was on a corpse's toe. You decide not to press for details. You return to your village weeks later, limping, thinner, and deeply uninterested in any more noble causes. Your neighbors cheer softly, then ask if you brought back anything useful. You give your little brother a chipped dagger. He treats it like a king's sword. You have new scars, nightmares, a small pouch of coins. You also have a story, but you're not sure how to tell it. How do you explain the noise? The stink? The moment you realized you were stabbing a man not because you hated him, but because he was in your way. You sleep on your straw mattress that night and don't move once. You've survived war. But you'd trade all the coin and tails in the world for a week of peace and a bowl of soup that doesn't smell like boots. You're home now, more or less. Your foot still hurts from the war. Your helmet is stashed under your cot, rusting quietly. And every loud noise makes your shoulder twitch, like it's expecting another arrow to come whistling out of nowhere. But you're alive, and that's worth something. Tonight, though, you face a different kind of battle. Getting some sleep. The sun's gone down, the fire's reduced to embers, and the village has settled into the usual nighttime hush, interrupted only by distant coughing, the occasional animal noise, and a chorus of snores coming from your own hut. You lie down on your straw mattress. It's a flattened sack of chaff and weeds stuffed into a wooden frame, and it smells like everything that's ever slept on it, which includes your siblings. Because yes, you don't sleep alone. Not in this century. Your whole family piles together on and around the same sleeping area. Space is limited, privacy is non-existent, and someone always steals the blanket. Or, in most cases, the blanket, singular. You curl under the woolen cloth, which is slightly damp and definitely crawling with a few of your many uninvited guests. Fleas? For sure. Lice? Absolutely. Bedbugs? Probably on vacation until spring. You itch. You scratch. You do the nightly flick and pray method. Flick the blanket. Pray no bugs land in your mouth. Above you, the rafters creak. The wind whistles through the thatch roof. You pull your cloak tighter around your shoulders. There is no central heating. The fire has gone out for the night to conserve wood, and the cold seeps in through the walls and floor like a soggy ghost. In winter, it's even worse. You've woken up with frost on your blanket before. You once tried sleeping with your boots on, and while it helped your toes, your dignity took a hit when your brother laughed for 5 minutes straight the next morning. Some people sleep sitting up, especially elders, because it's easier on the lungs. Some nap in shifts, especially during harvest season. And if you're working a night watch at the manor or tending a sick child, you don't sleep at all. As you lie there, listening to someone snore with the dedication of a trumpet section, your mind drifts. Maybe, if you were noble, you'd have your own bedroom, with a feather mattress, soft linen sheets, and carved oak posts. You've heard that some lords have curtains around their beds, not for decoration, for warmth and privacy. Imagine that. 4 walls around your sleep. Unthinkable. The wealthiest even sleep in night clothes, loose linen shirts, warm wool caps, socks. You're wearing your daytime tunic, which smells faintly of firewood, sweat, and turnips. It's fine. You're used to it. And really, the warmth of your siblings, the occasional nuzzle from the family dog, and the draped cloak over your feet do provide a kind of comfort. A scratchy, crowded, semi-restful comfort. You hear a cough across the room. Your sister rolls over and kicks you in the shin. Your father mutters something about geese in his sleep. You sigh. This is normal. And then there are the dreams. Some say dreams are divine messages. Others think they're just the brain's way of emptying chamber pots. You mostly dream of food, dry boots, and the occasional flirtatious glance from the Reeves' daughter, who once gave you a withered apple and hasn't looked at you since. If you're lucky, you'll sleep until dawn. But chances are, you'll be woken up once or twice. Maybe by a child wetting the bed. Maybe by a knock at the door. Or maybe just your bladder reminding you that chamber pots are a thing, and that getting out of bed means cold feet, dark corners, and hoping you don't step on the dog. Sometimes you wake before the sun, unable to get back to sleep. It's quiet then. Still. Almost peaceful. The kind of silence that only comes when even the fleas seem to be sleeping. You lie there, staring at the rafters, listening to the slow breathing of your family, and feeling, oddly, safe. You know you'll have to get up soon. The fields are waiting. The animals need feeding. Your tunic needs drying, and your boots need, well, replacement, if we're being honest. But for now, you have a few more minutes. And in those minutes, in that dark warmth shared with those who are tired just like you, there is something close to rest, something close to peace. The fire has faded to a soft orange glow now, casting gentle light across the packed dirt floor. Outside, the wind has died, and the only sound is the occasional creak of wood or the slow breathing of those nearby. You shift beneath the rough wool blanket, the edges of the day softening in your mind. The aches, the hunger, the scratchy tunic, they're still there, but quieter now, tucked into the corners of your thoughts like distant shadows. Let your body settle. Let your breath fall into a rhythm as slow as the falling ash from a forgotten hearth. This world, with all its hardship and noise, can wait. Right now, there's only the quiet, the weight of your limbs sinking into straw, the gentle warmth beside you, the hush of night wrapping itself around the house like a cloak. You've survived the mud, the cold, the confusion of strange cures and stranger customs. You've endured the bitter stew, the barking reeve, the awful shoes. And somehow, against all odds, you're still here, resting, breathing, drifting. So close your eyes. Let the flickering thoughts of turnips, prayers, and crooked helmets fade into nothing. Let your mind wander out over the fields, into the mist, past the old stones, and down into dreams. You've earned your sleep. Let it take you now. Good night.